Hey everyone! Today we'll talk about how to increase your efficiency as an Android developer. My name is Rahul, I'm an Android engineer at Facebook, and I also create content on YouTube about Android and tech careers. My goal for today is to not only have you walk away with some practical tips to increase your productivity, but also I'd like to share some of the reasons why I really believe that investing time in efficiency will make you a better developer in the long term. The way I like to think about efficiency as a software engineer is to ask the question, are we taking full advantage of our computers? There are a ton of really smart people who have put a lot of thought into the devices and applications that we're spending hours and hours every day with. So what we can do is look at the tasks that we're repeating a lot during our normal working day. If we're doing something deterministic, step by step, in a manual way, and we're doing it repeatedly, there's almost certainly a way to automate that. And that has two benefits. The first one is obvious, which is that it will increase speed. Right? You're taking a manual process and you're automating parts of it or all of it, and that will decrease the amount of time it takes. But the second benefit, which I think is sometimes overlooked, is that it will decrease the number of mistakes or prevent mistakes altogether. Humans are prone to making mistakes. They'll always make mistakes. But computers will do exactly what they're told. And they'll actually do it very, very quickly. And so in general, if you have the opportunity to punt work onto the computer, you should always do that because you'll actually end up with a higher end quality program or application. So the main lever that we have when thinking about efficiency is to avoid using your mouse as much as possible. You want to keep your hands on your keyboard because that way you'll have 10 ways of providing input to the computer as opposed to one way with point and click with your mouse. And so effectively, our vocabulary to communicate with the computer is at least an order of magnitude larger with keyboard-driven programming. So what I'd like to talk about during this session are 3 tools for improving efficiency. First, keyboard shortcuts in Android Studio, because that's where most of Android developers are going to spend their time. Second, I'd like to talk about how we can use ADB with aliases to make it actually way more friendly and way easier to actually interact with ADB. And third, I want to touch on some of the power of live templates, which some people may not be familiar with. Let's start by taking a look at keyboard shortcuts within Android Studio. And I want to focus our time on the highest leverage shortcuts that I see people sometimes not being aware of. If you want a reference of what we'll go over, you can scan this QR code, which will take you to a Medium article, which has a table describing the shortcut and what it is on a Windows machine and a Mac machine. I had a hard time internalizing the value of some of the keyboard shortcuts until I saw situations where they'd be useful. And so I'm going to hop over to Android Studio now, and I'll demonstrate a situation where I would actually use each of the shortcuts. I'll cover 8 shortcuts for editing and then 8 shortcuts for navigation within Android Studio. What we're looking at here is a dummy project I created, which will help demonstrate the different shortcuts. And I have a comment at the top, which will outline the 8 different editing shortcuts that I want to cover right now. So first is quick fix and intention actions. This is probably the most important shortcut that I find people don't know about. So if there's one thing you want to remember from this whole presentation, have it be this one. The idea is that based on the context and based on the error that you're encountering in your project, Android Studio can automatically fix it for you. A good example is on line 24. So log is highlighted in red, indicating error. And the issue here happens to be that we don't have the proper import for logging. So we can use Option Enter, and on line 5, Android Studio automatically added that import. And the really powerful thing about this shortcut is it can be used in multiple contexts. So here we're making a function call to employee.fullname, and we want to save that into a local variable. So again, we can do Option Enter and introduce a local variable which is appropriately named based off of the function name. And then another example of where we might want to use this is, let's say we want to create a new method which takes in the employee name and an ID. I'll call it my method. And it'll take in the full name that we just defined along with an employee ID. So this method doesn't exist yet, but I can go over to the red portion indicating the error and again use Option Enter, and now Android Studio will actually create this function for us. And the nice thing is that it will automatically insert sensible parameter names, and it'll include the correct type. So it saves you a bunch of typing. The next shortcut is moving your cursor one word at a time. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with this. So assume that your cursor is here. Rather than navigating one character at a time, I can hold down Option, and I can now quickly go to, for example, the ID and modify that. What I want to communicate here is that you probably are already familiar with different navigation or editing tricks on other programs. A lot of those will actually carry over into Android Studio. So don't be afraid to experiment with that and try it out. The third shortcut is around reformatting code. So if we open up this class called Employee Sick Day Manager, you can see how the formatting is all messed up here, and that makes it a little bit harder to actually understand the structure of this program. So I can use Option Command L, and that will automatically format the whole file. And the powerful thing is that this will also work in layout files. So here we have activity employee.xml, and you can see again how the spacing is all weird, and this will compile fine, but as a developer it makes it hard to read. So again, Command Option L, it will format everything for us. And the other thing it'll do is it will put the attribute names in a standard order, so you won't have conflicts with other developers on your team. The fourth shortcut is to comment or uncomment a block of code. So let's say that we want to not call the myMethod function that we defined because we're debugging something else. So I can use Command/ to comment it out. And I can also toggle back and forth, again, by using Command/. And this will also work on multiple lines of code. The fifth shortcut is around autocomplete. And so I'm sure many of you are already familiar with this, but let's say that we type dot in order to call a function on a particular object, and I want to call write method. And you can hit enter in order to use that, but annoyingly, this will leave off the remainder of that line, and we'll have to manually delete it. So a better way of doing this is I can say dot and then start typing the method name that I want to call, and instead of hitting enter, hit tab. And that will replace the contents of that line instead of adding it in. The sixth keyboard shortcut is to move a code block up or down. So let's say that we want to construct the Employee Sick Day Manager and call this method on it before we call myMethod. So what we can do is highlight the lines that we want to move and then use Option Shift up or down arrow key to move it where we want. And we can combine that with the previous shortcut of formatting your code to make sure that the indentation is always going to be correct. The seventh shortcut is around renaming a variable or a method. So if we go into the Employee Sick Day Manager, we can see how the member variable sick days is misspelled. And so what we can do is say Shift F6, and now we can correct the spelling. And this will update all the references to this variable in this class and in any other class, which is what you want with refactoring. And then finally, we can use multiple cursors to make multiple edits at once. So back in Employee Sick Day Manager, you'll notice how each of these functions is logging at error level, log.e. But we might want to change all of them to be log.i at info level logging. So what we can do is select the portion where we want multiple cursors to appear, and then do Control G, and that will select all the occurrences of that highlighted text. And so now we have 4 cursors. I can modify all of them to log.i, hit escape, go back to 1 cursor, and now very quickly I've updated all of them to be info level logging. So now I want to spend a couple minutes walking through some of the powerful navigation shortcuts within Android Studio. And in some ways, I think that this is more important than learning editing shortcuts, because as developers, we're probably going to be spending more time reading code than writing code. And so figuring out how to quickly go with the declaration of a variable or a class, or opening or closing tool windows, or opening up a particular file, that becomes really important. And if you're going to remember any of these shortcuts, similar to last time, the one that I want you to take away is the first one, which is search everywhere. So if I hit double shift, that will open up this dialog, which allows us to search across classes, files, symbols, actions, get. And the reason this is powerful is because it will show you how to learn other shortcuts. So for example, I could type caret here, and then, what if I want to move my caret or my cursor to the end of a code block? And now with this dialog, I can see what that shortcut is. So in the future, if I keep coming back to the shortcut, I can commit that to muscle memory. And of course, I could use this for other things as well. beyond actions, I could say I want to find out any symbol which has employee in it. I have a variable called employee ID, and there are also several classes which are named employee. The second shortcut is to open a tool window. So if you hover over one of the tool windows at the border of Android Studio, you might see a shortcut for it. For example, project is Command 1, or terminal is Option F12. And so you can use that to toggle that tool window, open or closed. And then you'll notice that some tool windows don't actually have a corresponding shortcut. For example, the to-do tool window. And so in that case, you can again go back to the search everywhere and then look for that, and then there will be an option here to open that tool window. And once you're in this state where you have multiple tool windows open, the third shortcut is how can I close all these windows and just go back to my code. And for that, we'll use Command Shift F12, and then we get our focus back to the code. The next navigation shortcut is around opening a file. And so if we do Command Shift O, it'll bring up this dialog, which will allow us to search through different files. And here you could say, I want to open up the Employee Vacation Manager class, and I can start typing Employee Vacation Manager, and then I have it pop up. But actually, a faster way to navigate between files is to utilize the camel casing of Kotlin or Java. And so with Employee Vacation Manager, I could simply type EVM, and you can see now the first suggestion is Employee Vacation Manager. The next navigation shortcut is jump to declaration, and you might already be doing this by holding down Command and then clicking with your cursor, and that'll go to that file. But another way of doing this is to put your cursor where you want to jump to the declaration and then use the shortcut Command B. The next shortcut is around recent files. And so we previously navigated to the Employee Vacation Manager class, and I just jumped to the declaration of the employee class. And so now if I hit Command E, then you'll see that those are the two recent files that pop up in this recent files dialog. And you'll often be toggling back and forth between a couple files, and so that's why the recent files is actually very valuable here. The next shortcut is around find usages. And this can work in multiple contexts. For example, here I have a local variable called employee. I can use Option F7, and that will bring up all the usages of this local variable within this class. But I could also do it at the class level. For example, the employee class, I can say Option F7, and again, I can see there are two usages, and I can see where they are. And then finally, navigating between files. This is something that we'll do very frequently as a developer. So there are two ways of doing this. The first way is to view the tabs at the top of Android Studio, similar to how you think about your browser. So you can switch between tabs using Command, Shift, and then left or right bracket. But actually, the way I prefer to navigate between files is by thinking about where my cursor was, almost like a backstack. So for example, if I open up the Employee Sick Day Manager, and then here I navigate to the Employee Manager, which is a very common thing. I kind of descend down some code path to figure out what's happening. Now I want to go back to where I was. And so for that, I can use Command bracket to go back to where my cursor was before, and then again to go back to the Employee Activity class. And that is a really nice way of thinking about it, because you're kind of descending down a stack trace and coming back up. When it comes to keyboard shortcuts within Android Studio or any IntelliJ-based application, we just barely scratched the surface of what is possible. But what I really recommend is that think about this as an 80-20 rule, where you can get 80% of the benefit from 20% of the effort. There's a small number of keyboard shortcuts that you're going to use repeatedly, and those are the ones that you should really invest in. And then as you find the need for other shortcuts, you can add them to your muscle memory and to your workflow, but don't try learning everything all at once. So hopefully the 16 that we showed here is a good balance of things you might be somewhat familiar with and something that you're not, and you can start there and then expand over time. Most Android developers are probably already using keyboard shortcuts to some extent, but the next category of improving our efficiency, I think, is not known about or not used as much as it should be, and it can actually be a really powerful way to automate some of the interaction with your Android device. And so what I'm talking about is ADB. or Android Debug Bridge, which is a command line tool to communicate with a device. So you may not even be aware that you're using it, but you almost certainly are, because ADB is used, for example, to take a file like your APK that you've developed on your machine and pushing it onto a connected Android emulator or a physical device on your computer. So in general, ADB is used as a way to communicate between your development machine and the Android device which is hooked up to your laptop. And so ADB has a ton of functionality in it, and similar to keyboard shortcuts, where I'm just barely going to scratch the surface, but the point of this category is to introduce aliases to command line, which make it way easier for you to actually take advantage of a lot of the power of ADB. So if we switch over into Android Studio, what I have here on the emulator is the already running application. It's a very simple login form which has an email and password, and you hit the sign in button, and then we should navigate to the main activity. And what I have open in Android Studio is the bash RC file. So the shell that I'm using on my MacBook is bash, and the way to add aliases is by writing them in the bash RC. So one example of a powerful functionality of ADB is a screenshot. So many of you might already be taking screenshots by pointing and clicking over here, but you can actually do the same thing with ADB. So here what I have is ADB exec out screen cap, and I'm placing that file on my desktop. And I'm aliasing that to screenshot. And so once you've sourced your bash RC file, then what you can do is simply run screenshot from your terminal, and then open up the file that was just created, desktop screenshot. So here's the resulting screenshot on my desktop, and you can see how it does match up with the emulator on the right side. And the reason this is powerful, again, is because we don't have to now point and click on the screenshot option, and especially if we're managing or taking multiple screenshots, it'll be way faster to manage all those resulting files from your desktop or document folder. And then you can send that to your designer friend or whoever else to get feedback. There are 3 more aliases that I want to talk through with ADB. First is atext, which is simply a wrapper around ADB shell input text as a way to enter text into the currently focused edit text on your Android device. Second is aback, which is a way to send a back key press to the device. And then finally, a login, which is a way to automatically fill out a login form. So the way it works is it will actually take in a parameter. And so we say like a login Rahul@test.com. That will enter in Rahul@test.com in the first edit text. Then we'll hit tab to go to the next edit text, and then enter in my test password. And the reason this is important or valuable is because when I'm developing an app, I will often be using a test account, and all of them will generally have the same password. And so all I need to do now is enter in the email or username, and it will automatically fill out the form for me. So let me show all of these to you in action. First, I can say a login Rahul@test.com. And when I hit enter, just pay attention to the right side here. It should automatically fill out the email and password. So that will get sped up quite a bit. Now I'm able to quickly tap on the sign in button. And again, keep in mind that ADB can also automate that if you really want, and you have knowledge about the coordinates of a particular button. You can send a tap event. Now we're in the main activity, and again, we can do something quite similar. So I want to fill out my favorite dessert here as Oreos. Hit submit, and maybe I can do one more, which is around cake. Now I want to be able to send a back key press to the device to dismiss the keyboard. So I'll say a back. And now I will say back again to go back to the previous activity, and then one more time, and that will dismiss the application altogether. And so depending on your workflow and depending on the layout of your Android application, you can customize these aliases to suit your need and really make it a lot faster to deal with your emulator or physical Android device. Finally, the last category of tools that I think can really improve efficiency is called live templates. So what are live templates? They are a feature of IntelliJ and therefore Android Studio, because Android Studio is based on IntelliJ. It's a way to insert common constructs into your code, such as loops, conditions, or logs. And this is especially helpful with Android because we know that Android can be a little bit verbose. So a good example of this is when you want to create a toast. Then there's an inbuilt live template, which we can just use, and then the template of creating a toast and showing it will automatically be filled out for us. And in general, whenever you have any amount of boilerplate code which is specific to your project or maybe just specific to Android, you can use a live template to make your life a lot easier. So if we hop back into Android Studio, I want to show 3 live templates, and then I also want to show you an example of how you could create your own. So first, that toast example, just to drive the point home, all I do is I type toast and I hit tab, and then Android Studio will give me a template for the different parameters I need to fill out. So for the first parameter, I need to pass in a context, so I'll pass in this. Then I need to give the text, I'll say inside on create. And then the length of the toast is already pre-filled out. And then I can't tell you how many times I've forgotten to add .show at the end of my toast and nothing shows up, but the use of the live template will make sure I never forget that. Another common use of a live template is log I, and that's a shorthand for logging at info level. And you can see how it pre-fills in the tag, and the message will include the method name already. And then my cursor is put right at the end of that message. And the same thing can be applied for logging at error level, for example, or warning level. One more use of live templates that's built in is called postfix notation. And the idea here is that given a list or a string or a number, there are certain things that are commonly done with those. So for example, on line 16, I have a list of strings which are desserts. And so one thing I might want to do is iterate over that list. And I can say desserts.for, and you can see how this is a live template, and I'll automatically have this for loop constructed for me with a sensible parameter name here. And then I can use log.I, for example, to log each dessert in that list. And if you wanted to add your own live template, which is specific to something about boilerplate in your project, you can open up preferences with command, comma, and there's a section inside of editor called live templates. And so here you can actually see some of the live templates that are built in. So for example, we have toast, and every live template will have an abbreviation, which is what you have to type in order to make that live template show up. And you can see how you can add in templates here using $. And so we have a context, we have a text, and that's where the cursor will appear as the user presses tab when selecting that live template. And so I haven't actually had too much of a need to create my own custom live template, but let me show you what that might look like. I created another group of templates called Rahul templates, and inside of here I have one called set shared preferences, because it is a little bit annoying to add in another key value pair in shared preferences. So I'm adding that boilerplate here, and notice how it says applicable in Kotlin. So it's only in Kotlin code, and this is an expression, and you can actually change that to be comment, class, and so on, but in this case we want it to be an expression. And so then we can tap OK, and now we can actually see that live template in action. Okay, set shared pref, and you can see the 4 lines are automatically added in. User details. This is a good example of how it saved us a bunch of typing by predefining what the code should look like. Among the 3 categories of tools that we've covered, I hope at least parts of it are applicable to your dev environment and can deliver tangible productivity gains from what we've talked about. One thing I wanted to mention, though, is that avoid the temptation to obsess over your tools. In my experience, a better way of actually benefiting from these keyboard shortcuts or live templates or ADB aliases is to just go through your normal workflow, and when you notice something is inefficient, then you dig into it and figure out how you can automate it. If you try learning a bunch of things up front, it's actually very easy to forget that, and you're going to end up having just wasted time. There's a nice XKCD comic, which I needed to put into the presentation, which talks about at what point is it worth figuring out how to optimize or automate something, given how frequently you do it. And I think the realm that we're operating in is the upper left, where we're doing something very frequently as part of our development workflow, and we're trying to shave off a couple seconds on every operation. And that is really where, because we're doing this action so frequently, you actually have a lot of leverage and time savings if you can figure it out. But I think that there's a broader point to this graph, which I think is a little bit tongue-in-cheek as well, which is kind of insinuating that you are over-optimizing if you're thinking about it at this level. And I think that there is something about efficiency which is hard to quantify. The way I think about it is that all these tools that we've talked about are ways for you to enter into a flow state where you feel like you're in control of your environment and you're able to get things done quickly. And I think one of the things that is really amazing about software is that it's so easy to write code and then to rewrite code and then rewrite it again. And so with the tactics that we've described here, I'm hoping that it won't feel like a heavy lift for you to ever write or rewrite any code. And that means that you'll do it more because it'll feel easier to you. And that will result in you being a better software engineer. So with that, I hope that the time that you spent watching this presentation, you will earn back through better productivity. And I'm also hoping that you might invest more in efficiency going forward. Thanks so much for joining, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thanks a lot.